Why are so many of our cities such unpleasant places to spend time in? They are an extension of our homes, they are our communities, they are the places where we lead our lives. As such, they should be built and designed to make life there as enjoyable as possible. Yet the majority of them are unattractive, unpleasant, and unsafe, full of overly wide streets, honking cars, and generic buildings. Why have we made them like this? Because this didn't just happen. Our cities are a product of intentional planning and design and millions of choices over the course of many, many years. Considering that their development is within our control, why have we chosen to create so many environments that are unpleasant and inhospitable to human life? When we look at illustrations of how people imagined utopias in the past, or how AI depicts beautiful futuristic cities, they look nothing like what we have today. The perfect city is still far from our reach. But it is one of the most meaningful things to aspire to create because our built environments impact every part of our lives, from our health to our social connections to our opportunities for joy and prosperity. Here at the Perfect City podcast, we will work on describing, defining, and understanding what is the perfect city so that we can lay the foundations for creating it. I'm Tayana Panova, Doctor of Psychology focusing on urban planning's impact on health, and my co-host Ariel Vieira is a documentarian that examines the intersection between history and urbanism. So let's dive in. Ariel, what does the perfect city mean to you?
Oh, wow. That is a great question. To me, the perfect city is about density because I think cities inherently shouldn't be dominated by the car. I think they really do thrive when there's walkability and good public transit. To me, that really defines the perfect city.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense because density is an integral component of walkability, and walkability is an incredibly desirable factor of great cities. And I think we often forget to define walkability when we talk about it, assuming everybody knows what that means. But it's not quite so intuitive because walkability just implies you can walk around. Yet there's more to it than that. If a city is truly walkable, it means that it's enjoyable to walk around. It inspires you to walk around. So there are other components necessary to make that happen. For example, we need to have shops, we need to have interesting destinations, public spaces, landmarks, things that motivate us to go out and walk rather than jump in a car and drive. So I agree. I think walkability is very necessary for a perfect city, and density because it's so related to it. And I would add that it should be full of destinations that inspire us to walk around because we want to see and experience them. And I also think that from a psychological standpoint, a perfect city is a city that is designed in accordance with human nature, with what we as human beings need and like and want. So for example, nowadays, as you mentioned, we have a lot of car centrism, which means cities are designed mostly for cars and not for people, which is very frustrating.
Yeah, it's super frustrating. I mostly travel between North America and Europe, and to me, it's a stark difference between both continents. And the fact many European cities are so friendly to just stroll around, and there's so many things to do and see and eat.
A lot.
Yes, yeah, precisely. Yeah.
Especially this year.
By actually exploring these cities, you end up seeing how it feels differently. Because a lot of people in the US try to theorize why cities are good, but they rarely have been to the cities that already work.
Right. So how does the perfect city feel?
You don't need to think about where you need to go to eat. When are you going to eat? What's the next bus that you're going to take? What's the next train you're going to take? You don't need to think about what direction you're going to go on, or what am I going to do, or how am I going to do it, or what show am I going to see. It's that I think that fluidity is what really makes a city really feel great. Because if you go to any typical car-dominated North American city, and this applies to many parts of the world, including Europe itself, you have to plan your day. Take my car from A to B, from my house to Walmart. What am I going to do later tonight? I can go to the movies. You have to think about it.
You got to think
in the
about
city,
when rush hour is, whether parking will be available, how long all those components of the day at different times are going to add to that trip, and whether you'll make it in time for the next thing on your schedule, like dinner or picking up the kids from school. Like you said, everything needs to be really carefully planned in a car-centric city. You can't just go out and do things.
Exactly. And that's why we're making this podcast, because I think people need to realize why certain cities feel so good. It's a coincidence that millions upon millions of Americans through the past century visited cities like Paris and Rome and London, and then continue to dream about those cities long after their vacations. A good city urban life does not have to be just a vacation. It could be one's daily life, even in suburban areas, even in smaller rural towns. You can still have very great urbanism.
Absolutely. And I think that that's such an important point. I love the concept of fluidity that you brought up. And it's very similar to the concept of the intuitive city. I often think about a city that's a great city, that's well designed and well planned. It's an intuitive city, which means that it can read your mind in a sense, and you can read its mind, quote unquote, because there is just a natural flow. Like you said, the fluidity. When I'm walking in a great city, a city that I would consider really well designed and well planned, it's like the city knows and expects what I'm going to be wanting at any given moment. For example, if I get hungry, very quickly I'll come upon a cafe, I'll come upon a restaurant, I'll come upon multiple options so I can choose from one. If I'm feeling tired or I need to tie my shoelaces, I'll come upon a bench, because a great city knows people need to sit down very often, because we have all kinds of ages and physical abilities in a city, and people need to sit down. A great city knows that when there are certain hot spots on either side of the street, you're going to need a crosswalk there because people are going to need to cross. It's going to know that the sun beating down on your head isn't comfortable, and it isn't safe, and it isn't healthy. So there should be trees, there should be awnings. So a perfect city, like I said in the beginning, is a city that's designed in accordance with human nature, human needs, and human wants. It can, quote unquote, read your mind, and you, because you see that it is so intuitively designed, automatically understand that what you need and want will be fulfilled within the urban planning very quickly. You don't have to plan ahead, like you said, when you're driving, by looking at Google Maps and finding the store in the vicinity and finding the cafe in the vicinity, because you're not going to just come upon it as you would in a walkable, well-designed city.
Precisely. So before we continue forward, people are probably wondering, who the hell are you two guys trying to why are you talking about this topic? What qualified you to even say what's a good city or not? What's your background? What's your background, Tayana?
So let's cover that. Okay, so I'm a doctor of psychology, but I'm now in the field of urbanism, and I think a lot of people are confused by this pivot that I've made in life. But for me, it was very natural, because my research focused on how technology impacts psychology and mental health. I was researching why we have such a dependence on things like smartphones and the internet and social media. Why do we use them so much to a degree that it becomes a problem for us and that we become dependent on them? And what I realized is that we use these technologies so intensively because they satisfy needs, fundamental human needs that we have, that are not satisfied by our real world, that are not satisfied by our built environment. Two of the main ones being social connection and stimulation. People need to connect with each other. We are social beings, we always have been, and we have very powerful, complex brains that need to be regularly stimulated. So if we live in an environment that's understimulating, or in other words, boring, and in an environment that does not offer us opportunities to connect with each other, like public places and walkable areas, then we're going to seek out social connection and stimulation in whatever way it is available to us. And in the modern age, that is via our technology. So I realized naturally that if we want to fix our relationship to technology, and if we want to fix our mental health and our overall well-being, we have to stop hyperfixating on the devices that we use to cope and look at the problem we're trying to cope with. So the fundamental problem is that our environments are faulty. Our environments are not well designed and they do not satisfy our fundamental needs. So the main thing that we need to be doing is focusing on improving those built environments. And that's how I pivoted into urbanism. And now I'm looking into how we can create urban environments that do satisfy our needs and that create happy and healthy residents.
And you grew up also in two different worlds, which is
Yes.
suburban and urban.
Yes, so I've been very fortunate to be able to travel around often and to live in different places like Barcelona. I've lived in the suburbs in the United States. I've lived in bustling American cities like New York. So I've seen different kinds of built environments. I've lived in a village. I've lived on an island. So I've seen the different kinds of urban structures that are popular nowadays, and I've been able to compare them and to see what works and what doesn't work. And really, in my experience, the worst designed urban environment or the worst designed built environment for human development and mental health, in my opinion, would have to be low density car centric environments like suburbia.
That's what attracted me to your content initially, because I first discovered you, I think, around like late 2021. I was like, oh my God, someone who finally makes sense. A good portion of urbanism talk out there in social media tends to be around bike lanes, political policies, or like why are trains better than cars? Usually those are the conversations.
Trains, yes.
It's very kind of like physical. And I agree. Those are all very important topics. But I think a lot of people forget the psychological impacts and benefits of good urbanism. Also, you had such a fervor and a passion.
I'm very passionate about this topic because you know what? It's so important. And in my opinion, it's so obvious the connection it has, the built environment, to our mental health and our well-being and almost everything in our modern world today, I believe in some way can be traced back to the design of our urban environment. And yet almost nobody's talking about those connections, which to me is baffling. So now we're talking about it and we're creating content on it. And I think that is super important because people need to be aware of these connections in order to have a better control over their lives and what happens to them and to be able to improve those lives. And speaking of content, your content is incredibly diverse as well, exploring different cities around the world and giving your opinions and thoughts and information about how those cities came to be from a historical standpoint, which I think also fills a very important gap because in order to understand what's going on in the present, we have to know how we got here and where we came from the past and what has changed over time, like a lot of topics such as zoning and mixed-use development and things used to be common in the past when we had no cars, and they changed drastically with the advent of the car, and our cities changed. So understanding the history and how we got here is super important to creating better cities in the future. So how did you get into the urbanism space?
I have to go back all the way to childhood. Like you, I grew up in two worlds, quite literally, because I'm Puerto Rican, raised in New York. So I call myself a New Yorican. And the interesting thing about coming from Puerto Rico is that, and I would visit Puerto Rico multiple times a year through my entire childhood, all the way into early adulthood. And I still to this day visit Puerto Rico very often. Puerto Rico is a very suburban country. It's car dominated. There's about 3 big cities in Puerto Rico, San Juan, Ponce, and Mayagüez. But the rest, pretty much you need a car to get around anywhere in Puerto Rico. And I grew up simultaneously at the same time in Jackson Heights, Queens, which is one of the densest.
Wonderful neighborhood.
It's a wonderful neighborhood, one of the most diverse neighborhoods in the entire world, and also one of the densest neighborhoods in all of New York City. So I saw those two worlds very vividly. And then in combination, later on in my high school years to my early college years, I moved to Long Island. So I got to see suburban life, but still being right next to the city. So I would constantly commute back and forth. So I've always was fascinated by cities. And I would play games like SimCity and other builder games like Railroad Tycoon, Roller Coaster Tycoon. So I was always obsessed with construction, engineering, cities. In college, I was actually about to become a urban planner. I wanted to study civil engineering to go into urban planning. But unfortunately, in the college I went to, City College of New York, there was a professor who taught a 102 class, and she failed nearly the entire class. She only passed 1 or 2 people per semester. And this was a massive roadblock No pun intended. So I pivoted to electrical engineering. And behold, when I graduated, electrical engineering class was like 60 people, and civil engineering was like 3 or 4. And it was due to this one professor that no longer
Wow,
works
that's
with the
crazy.
university. But nonetheless, I decided to pivot to engineering, but never used my engineering degree, though I've always continued to have an interest in construction and how cities are built. But long
Gives you
story
a good
short,
foundation.
there's good family. Yeah. Long story short, I pivoted into media and I ended up working for Curbed, which was part of Vox Media at the time. And I started making live videos about the history of New York City. And I just fell in love with video making. And fell in love with live video, specifically live video in the major city, because live video, I can walk around for 2 hours or so and hop around between landmark and landmark, or museum to bakery to landmark or whatnot. The great thing is by walking, there's a lot to see. And that's how I started my career, making videos about the history of cities. And then later on, watching channels like Not Just Bikes and many other amazing channels on YouTube, I started really becoming super hyper aware and learning about the work of like Jane Jacobs, hyper aware of how these cities run. And that's why I end up calling my channel Urbanist, because I got that name from what was the honorific title for Jane Jacobs here in New York City, which was the woman who saved Greenwich Village and a whole host of other neighborhoods. She was not a person who studied urban planning or civil engineering. She actually just walked through the cities, got to learn about the cities by exploring it. And likewise for me, I just love to learn about the cities while exploring it. And after extensively traveling through Europe, it made me really astute to the fact that in the US, we only have a handful of cities that could compare to most European cities. There's some magic with these dense cities, many of them which were constructed prior to the car.
Yeah.
Some of them are ancient and some of them are medieval. But there's some magic to this style of urbanism that I think we can learn from as Americans and many people all around the world. And that's why
Definitely.
we're here.
Yeah. And well, in your travels and in mine, I'll give my thoughts as well. But
Yeah.
have you come across a perfect city
Yeah, well, it's all about comparison.
or a near perfect city? Like, have you come across this thing we're trying to describe and define and discover? Have we found it yet, or does it not exist and has to be created?
I think there's the opportunity to build better and better cities. I think to think that us humans have already mastered a city, aka Paris, in my opinion, is probably one of the better examples. Next episode, stay
And it's
tuned. We're
always
going to talk about a
improving.
very famous city in Spain. We have built very great cities as humans. For context, I haven't been to Tokyo yet. I haven't been to East Asia, but I know Paris, Barcelona, Rome are all great cities. But I think we can continue to build even better cities moving forward.
Definitely.
Yeah.
For sure.
How about
I think
yourself?
that, yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that some cities, especially now in the past few years, are starting to really figure it out and starting to try to improve and create spaces that are human friendly instead of car friendly. And they've changed their focus to be about how can we maximize health, well-being, happiness, prosperity. So with that fresh focus, they're starting to develop and design cities that feel better and better for people, not just for cars or for businesses or industry, which it has been for a long time. I think that, the perfect city is something that is by definition flawless or ideal, a utopia, which very rarely exists, but it's something to strive for. And I think that one of the reasons we're doing this podcast with this focus is because in order to be able to create something, you first have to have a vision for it. You first have to have an idea of what you want it to be, of what it looks like and feels like. If you have no vision, then you have no direction. So even if it's unrealistic to create or to plan for a perfect city, because perfect by definition is something that is out of reach. You need to have a vision of what that feels and looks like so we can approach it, so we can come close to designing it. And so I think that it does not yet exist, but we have places that are working on becoming as close as they can be to a perfect city by making changes and interventions that they feel move in that direction. And I think that that's very inspiring. I love this new movement. In the past few years, we've seen really a rise in interest in urbanism and urban planning and city life, and a lot more criticisms of the suburbs, which until recently were considered the American dream environment. You know, only recently did we start to question if that's really true and why maybe it isn't true. We still have a while to go, and often we see communities take strange directions or make strange decisions that are counteractive to this goal. But I think we also have a lot of cities that are trying, and those are the cities that we'll be discussing on this podcast in future episodes. And we'll also discuss cities that, in our opinion, aren't going in the right direction and what they could do to go in the right direction. And you know, there's a few topics that I think we feel strongly about,
because it's not just about the cities itself, but it's also the concepts behind building these cities and how we continue to grow our cities, such as mixed use is something that a lot of people overlook, which means a building that consists of a mix of residential and commercial. And sometimes it could be light industrial as well, like bakeries and things like that. But usually mixed use is a staple of a city for the past 2,000 or so years, since the times of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Or maybe even before. So those topics we're going to touch upon. And I think I just realized we should also touch upon the visionaries of urbanism that might have gone a bit too far in their wild ideas, like a Robert Moses or a Le Corbusier.
Yes.
So sometimes we see urbanism take a really crazy direction, a utopic direction that ends up becoming quite dystopic.
I think that's a really interesting topic, which is, in the pursuit of perfection or utopia, we see this trend of certain visionaries, like you mentioned, have too rigid of a vision. We talk about the importance of a vision, but sometimes that vision is too rigid. And because it lacks flexibility, fluidity, and the ability to adapt to feedback, it ends up not being the right fit. Because as with all things, you need to adapt to the environment, you need to adapt to the changing times. If you try to impose a structure or an idea that's too rigid, it often will not work because it doesn't organically mesh with its context. Everything needs to fit within its context. I like to think of this as, for example, a failed organ transplant. You know, the organ needs to work well, but it also needs to mesh well with its context, with the body. The body needs to accept it in order for it to integrate in a healthy way. If you're just trying to put two things together that don't fit well together, well, you're not going to have good outcomes. And we're seeing that a lot lately with these rigid rules and structures imposed in a different time. And we still have them now after times have changed. For example, the zoning code. You know, the zoning code is a huge part of why America looks the way it does, especially the suburban areas, because it imposes very rigid rules on how things can be built. And those rules have not changed with the times. Nowadays, people value and want walkability, for example, which at the time of the boom of private vehicles, they didn't care about, because cars were cool. Cars were new and cars were great, and people wanted to design for cars, which was great at that time. And people wanted to escape industry because industry was noisy and smelly and polluted, and there was too many people. People were tired of the industrial age and they wanted to escape it into the peaceful oases of the suburbs. So creating this zoning where you separate residences from industry and other sorts of functions made sense then. People liked that idea and they wanted it. But that was decades ago. That was 60, 70 years ago. And now things are different. Cities have changed. They've become more interesting, cleaner, better, more beautiful. Life in them is no longer as unpleasant as it used to be. And it's enjoyable to be able to walk to the grocery store or walk to the local cafe and see a landmark and spend time in a park or a square. People want to be able to do that. But in many communities, they can't, because that zoning code from 100 years ago or 80 years ago is still in place. It hasn't changed and adapted to the new times, and that's holding them back. That's holding communities back from living up to their full potential and being as great as they can be, being the perfect city, quote unquote.
Oh yeah, we're going to talk about a lot of spicy topics. There's no coincidence that the majority of media out there, books, movies, comic books, take place in cities. Cities have captivated humans for thousands of years and will still continue to do so. We'll be covering topics all around the world and topics about urbanism. Stay tuned for next episode where we cover, why is Barcelona one of the best cities in the world? Stay curious, my friends.